Amara was 8 months pregnant when she moved into her husband Kenzo's family home in Mbarara, Uganda. She had just lost her job, and life was already hard enough. The house was huge, beautiful but cold, the kind of place where laughter didn't live anymore. When she arrived with her small suitcase and tired smile, Kenzo's mother greeted her with a forced politeness, the kind that hides judgment behind every word. But it was Kenzo's sister, Miriam, who made her feel small from the very first moment. She stood by the door, arms crossed, covered in gold jewelry that sparkled like her pride. Her eyes swept over Amara's worn dress and swollen feet. "So this is the woman you married," Miriam said with a smirk. "Couldn't you at least find someone with class?" The words cut deep, but Amara forced a smile and said nothing. She didn't want to cause trouble. She thought maybe if she stayed kind and quiet, things would get better. But each day, Miriam found a new way to remind her she didn't belong. She mocked Amara's simple clothes, her round body, even the way she spoke. Amara cooked, cleaned, and tried her best to keep peace in the house. But no matter what she did, it was never enough. Kenzo stayed silent, pretending not to hear his sister's cruel words. Every time Amara looked at him for support, he looked away. That silence hurt even more than Miriam's insults. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the baby kicked inside her belly, Amara would rest her hand on her stomach and whisper softly, "Don't worry, little one. Mama's not weak, just waiting." Her eyes would fill with tears, but there was something burning behind them, a quiet fire. She didn't know how yet, but deep inside, Amara promised herself that one day, they would never have to bow their heads to anyone again. A few days later, Miriam decided to throw a huge birthday party at the mansion. The whole house buzzed with activity, loud music, expensive decorations, and guests dressed in glittering clothes. Amara stayed in her small corner of the house, quietly watching as caterers and servants ran around. Even though she wasn't invited to help, she still walked up to Miriam and softly said, "Do you need me to serve or help with anything?" Miriam turned slowly, her lips curling into that same cruel smile. "No need," she said loud enough for others to hear. "The housemaids are already here." The guests nearby chuckled. Amara's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to stay calm. She didn't want to embarrass Kenzo or make things worse. She stood near the back, just observing, her hands resting on her belly as her baby kicked gently, a tiny reminder that she wasn't alone. Later that evening, when everyone was dancing and laughing, Miriam walked toward her with a glass of juice. For a brief moment, Amara thought maybe she was being nice for once. But then, in front of everyone, Miriam accidentally spilled the red juice all over Amara's dress. The cold liquid soaked through her clothes, staining the only decent dress she owned. Gasps filled the room, followed by laughter. Miriam smirked and said loudly, "Next time, wear something that doesn't look borrowed." The guests laughed again, and Amara stood frozen, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Kenzo saw everything, but instead of saying a word, he lowered his gaze, pretending not to notice. That silence broke her heart more than the laughter did. She turned away, her breath shaking, trying to hold herself together. But then she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. Her hand flew to her belly. The pain grew stronger, sudden and deep. The laughter faded around her as she gasped, whispering, "Kenzo, I think my water just broke." Miriam shrieked, stepping back as if Amara was contagious. "Not here," she shouted. "You'll ruin my carpet." Everyone stood in shock. Kenzo finally rushed forward, panic written all over his face. "Let's go." "Hold on, Amara," he said, wrapping his arm around her trembling shoulders as he led her out. No one else moved. No one offered to help. Miriam just stood there, fanning herself dramatically as if Amara had spoiled her night. The drive to the hospital was a blur of pain and fear. Amara cried softly, clutching Kenzo's hand, praying her baby would be safe. Hours later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, small, warm, and perfect. The nurse placed him in her arms, and for the first time in a long while, Amara smiled through her tears. She whispered to her son, "Welcome to the world, my love. It's not kind, but we'll make our own kindness." Kenzo sat quietly beside her, guilt heavy on his face. Miriam never came. Not a message, not a visit. The same people who laughed at her humiliation didn't even ask how she was. But as Amara looked at her baby, she felt something shift inside her, a quiet strength rising. She wasn't broken. She was just beginning. When Amara came back home from the hospital with her baby, she hoped things might finally be different. Maybe holding her son would soften Miriam's heart, or make Kenzo's family see her differently. But she was wrong. The same coldness, the same sharp looks. Nothing had changed. The only warmth in that house came from the tiny body sleeping in her arms. One afternoon, as Amara walked past the living room, she stopped when she heard laughter. Miriam was with her friends, sipping juice and bragging as usual. Amara was about to pass quietly when her name came up. "She thinks giving birth makes her important," Miriam said with a laugh. "Please, she can't even afford diapers. Kenzo should have married someone who brings pride to this family, not pity." The women burst out laughing. Amara froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, her eyes burning with tears. For a moment, she thought about storming in and shouting back. But then she looked down at her baby, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and something inside her broke, quietly, completely. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stood there, listening to her last bit of hope die. That night, when the house was asleep, Amara packed a small bag. She folded her baby's little clothes, tucked in a bottle of milk, and kissed him softly. The moonlight came through the window as she whispered, "We're leaving, my love. I don't know where yet, but anywhere is better than here." Without a sound, she walked out of the mansion, the same one she had entered with dreams of love and family. Now she left it behind, carrying nothing but her child and courage. She took the first bus to Kampala. The ride was long, the road rough, but she didn't care. When she arrived, she found a small, cracked apartment, just one room with a leaky roof and a dusty floor. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She laid her baby in a basket beside her bed and exhaled for the first time in months. To survive, Amara started weaving baskets by hand, something her grandmother had once taught her. She sat by the roadside, selling them to anyone who'd stop to look. Some days she earned barely enough for food, but she kept going. Every morning she smiled at her baby and said, "We'll be okay." Days turned into weeks. The sun burned her skin, and her fingers grew rough from the weaving, but she didn't stop. When her baby cried, she rocked him with one arm and worked with the other. Every sail, every long night made her stronger. Her sadness slowly hardened into determination. And one evening, as she watched the sunset through her tiny window, she whispered to herself, "They thought I was done, but I'll rebuild, quietly." The sun was hot that afternoon, and Amara sat under her small umbrella by the roadside, weaving baskets while her baby slept beside her in a worn blanket. The traffic roared, dust filled the air, and people hurried past without noticing her. Still, she kept working, her fingers moving fast and steady, shaping beauty out of struggle. Then, a woman in a neat dress and sunglasses stopped by. She looked elegant but kind, the kind of woman who carried herself with quiet confidence. "These are beautiful," she said, picking up one of Amara's woven bags. "Did you make them yourself?" Amara looked up, surprised anyone had stopped. "Yes, madam," she said softly. "I make all of them by hand." The woman smiled. "You have real talent. How much for this one?" Amara hesitated. 20,000 shillings. The woman laughed lightly. "You're underselling yourself." She handed her the money anyway and said, "My name is Mrs. Bonda. I own a boutique nearby. I'd like to place an order, maybe 20 of these in different colors. Can you do that?" Amara blinked, speechless for a moment. No one had ever asked her for that many before. Yes, I can," she said quickly, her heart racing with hope. Mrs. Bonda smiled again. "Good. Come to my shop tomorrow. Let's talk about turning this into something bigger. You have a gift, my dear. It just needs direction." That night, Amara barely slept. She kept looking at her baby and whispering, "Something good is finally happening, my love." The next day she went to the boutique, nervous but excited. Mrs. Bonda welcomed her like family, offered her tea, and spent hours teaching her how to price, market, and brand her work. She helped Amara set up a small business name, Mama Weave, inspired by the way Amara worked with her baby always by her side. From that moment, everything began to change. Mrs. Bonda introduced Amara's baskets and handbags to hotel gift shops and online stores. Orders started pouring in from different parts of Uganda, even from tourists visiting Kampala. Amara worked day and night, but now the work felt different. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was purpose. Within a few months, she rented a small workshop and hired 3 single mothers she had met at the market. "We'll grow together," she told them. She paid them fairly, making sure they could take care of their children too. As Mama Weave grew, so did Amara's confidence. Her name started to spread. Her products appeared in boutiques, hotels, and social media pages. People admired her designs, but few knew the pain that built her success. A year later, Amara stood outside a used car lot, holding the keys to her first car, a silver Toyota she bought with her own earnings. As she placed her baby, now a chubby, smiling 1-year-old, in the back seat, she couldn't stop the tears that rolled down her face. She whispered, "We did it, my little one. We really did it." The same woman who once left a mansion in shame now drove through Kampala with pride, her heart full, her spirit unbroken, and her dreams just beginning to bloom. 2 years passed, and Amara's life had completely changed. The same woman who once sold baskets by the roadside now stood on a grand stage in Kampala, lights flashing, cameras clicking, and people cheering her name. She wore a graceful emerald green dress, her hair neatly braided, and her smile, calm but powerful, told a story that no words could ever fully capture. She was there to receive the Women of Impact Award, an honor given to women who had changed lives through courage and innovation. As she walked to the podium, applause filled the hall. She looked out into the crowd, faces she didn't know, yet who believed in her. In that moment, she felt every tear, every insult, every lonely night had been worth it. A reporter stood up and asked, "Amara, after everything you went through, what kept you going?" She paused, her eyes soft but steady. "Pain," she said simply. "Pain was my teacher. It taught me to never depend on anyone who mocks your struggle. It showed me that when people push you down, they're really just giving you a better view of how to rise." The audience erupted in applause. Cameras flashed as her baby, now a bright, smiling toddler, clapped his tiny hands from the front row. After the ceremony, Amara met with her team. Mama Weave had just signed a major deal to supply handmade accessories to luxury resorts across East Africa. Her brand had grown beyond what she ever dreamed. Women she once hired as weavers now managed departments. Her products were featured in magazines and exported abroad. Life had become beautiful, not because it was perfect but because she built it from ashes. But while Amara's business was rising, somewhere across town, Kenzo's family was falling apart. Their textile factory, once the pride of Mbarara, was struggling. Orders had dried up, machines were breaking down, and Miriam's careless decisions had drained their profits. Rumors spread that they were close to bankruptcy. Then came a government announcement, a huge partnership opportunity for handmade and ethical local products. It was the kind of deal that could change a company's future forever. Businesses all across Uganda rushed to apply, including Amara's Mama Weave, and, unknowingly, Kenzo's family company. When Amara received the email that Mama Weave had been shortlisted, she cried tears of joy. It felt like a dream, the kind she used to whisper to her baby in their small apartment years ago. She didn't know that the same people who once called her worthless were now sitting in panic, preparing their own presentation for the very same opportunity. Destiny, it seemed, was finally circling back, quiet, poetic, and perfectly timed. As Amara looked out her office window that evening, the city lights sparkling below, she whispered, "See, my little one, pain wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of something powerful." The morning of the presentation was bright and full of promise. Amara stood in front of the mirror, dressed in a sleek black suit that hugged her figure perfectly. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her makeup soft but elegant. She looked powerful, nothing like the tired, humiliated woman who once stood in Miriam's living room begging for kindness. This was a new Amara, calm, confident, and unstoppable. She picked up her file labeled Mama Weave Proposal and kissed her son goodbye. "Wish me luck, my love," she whispered. "Today is big." Her little boy smiled and waved, not knowing that his mother was about to rewrite her story. The conference room was filled with important people, government officials, business leaders, and reporters. Amara walked in gracefully, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Heads turned. She carried herself with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. And then she saw them. Enzo, Miriam, sitting together at the far end of the table. Miriam's face froze, her eyes wide in shock. "Amara," she blurted out, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Amara stopped in front of them, her expression calm but unreadable. "I'm representing Mama Weave," she said with a polite smile. "We're one of the companies shortlisted for this contract." For a moment, silence filled the room. Kenzo looked like he had seen a ghost. Miriam blinked rapidly, trying to process what she just heard. The woman they once mocked, the one they called poor and useless, was now standing in front of them as their competition. When it was Amara's turn to present, she walked to the front with confidence. Her voice was steady, her words flowing like music. She spoke about how Mama Weave started with nothing but a single mother's hands and a dream. She talked about giving jobs to women who were once homeless, teaching them skills and paying them fairly. "Empowering women," she said gently, "isn't just good business, it's nation building. When you lift one woman, you lift a family. And when you lift a family, you lift a community." The board members nodded, clearly impressed. Some even clapped before she was done. Amara ended her presentation with a warm smile, thanking everyone for their time. The applause that followed was genuine and loud. Then it was Miriam's turn. She stood up stiffly, holding her papers with shaking hands. Her confidence cracked as soon as she began. She stumbled over her words, forgot key details, and spoke more about money than values. The board members looked bored and unimpressed. When she finished, the room was quiet, no applause, no smiles. Miriam glanced nervously at Kenzo, who sat there in awkward silence. As the meeting ended, Amara gathered her documents, her posture still proud. She walked past Miriam and Kenzo without gloating, no anger, no revenge. Just quiet dignity. Outside the conference room, she took a deep breath and smiled to herself. Life had come full circle. The same people who once looked down on her had just watched her rise higher than they ever imagined. She whispered softly, "That's the thing about storms, they don't break strong women. They make them shine." 2 weeks later, the results were announced. The government released the list of winners for the national partnership deal, and right at the top of the page was Mama Weave Enterprises. Amara had done it. She stared at her laptop screen in disbelief, her hands trembling. Tears filled her eyes as she covered her mouth and whispered, "We won, we actually won." Her team screamed with joy around her workshop. The women she had trained and hired hugged each other, some even crying. For them, this wasn't just a business win. It was food, stability, and hope. Amara stood in the middle of it all, smiling through tears. "This is for every woman who was told she wasn't enough," she said, her voice shaking. The news spread across Kampala like wildfire. Newspapers printed her story, calling her the woman who wove her way to success. TV stations aired clips of her interview, showing her standing strong and graceful. Everyone wanted to know who Amara was, this once unknown woman who built an empire from a single roadside stall. But in Barara, at the big old house she once called home, things were very different. Kenzo's family business had officially lost the contract. Without that deal, their company couldn't recover. Within days, they lost their biggest client, their accounts were frozen, and debt collectors started circling. The factory that once buzzed with life now stood silent, machines off, workers gone, and the gates locked. Miriam sat in her office, staring blankly at the closed sign hanging outside. All the pride, all the arrogance was gone. For the first time, she felt what Amara had once felt, helpless and alone. That night, Amara's phone rang. The name on the screen made her heart skip for a second. Kenzo. She hadn't heard his voice in years. She hesitated before answering. "Hello," she said quietly. There was a long pause, then a deep sigh. "Amara, congratulations," Kenzo said softly. His voice carried guilt, maybe even admiration. "You've changed so much." Amara looked out her window at the city lights, her baby's laughter echoing from the next room. She smiled faintly and said, "No, Kenzo, I haven't changed. I just remembered who I was before you made me forget." There was silence on the line. Then Kenzo whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." Amara took a deep breath. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said gently. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm coming back." Before he could say another word, she ended the call. Her heart felt light, not from revenge but from peace. She had nothing left to prove. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, he looked up at her and said, "Mama, why are you smiling?" She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Because, my love, the world tried to break me, but instead it built me." Outside, the rain began to fall softly, like the universe washing away the past, making room for everything new that was yet to bloom. Late one evening, the office lights at Mama Weave glowed softly against the night sky. Amara was reviewing reports when she heard a faint knock at the door. She looked up, surprised. It was almost 9 p.m. The door opened slowly. Standing there was Miriam, the same woman who once laughed at her torn dress, who called her a poor market girl. But tonight, Miriam looked nothing like the woman Amara remembered. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged, and her hands trembled as she clutched her worn handbag. "Amara," Miriam's voice cracked. "Please. I need help." Amara leaned back in her chair, calm and composed. "Help," she repeated softly. Miriam stepped forward, tears forming in her eyes. "I lost everything. The factory closed, Kenzo left. Can't even pay my rent. I was wrong about you. Please, I just need a job, any job." For a long moment, Amara said nothing. The room was silent except for the sound of the ticking clock on the wall. Then she slowly opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and slid a contract across the desk toward Miriam. "Here," Amara said, her voice steady. "It's a position in the warehouse, packaging department, minimum wage." Miriam froze. "The warehouse?" she whispered, almost in disbelief. Amara nodded gently. "Yes, you said you needed work. It's honest work. That's where I started, remember?" Miriam's face turned pale. She looked down at the paper, tears falling onto the desk. Her pride wanted to scream no, but her empty stomach said yes. She reached for the pen with shaking hands and signed. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. "I don't deserve this." Amara stood up, her expression unreadable. "You're right," she said quietly. "But this isn't about what you deserve. It's business. And in business, everyone earns their place, including you." Miriam nodded, wiping her tears, and walked out slowly. As the door closed, Amara took a deep breath and looked around her office. The shelves filled with her brand's handmade creations, the photographs of the women she'd helped, the life she built from nothing. A small, bittersweet smile appeared on her face. The same woman who once mocked her for selling bracelets in the sun was now working in her warehouse, under her name, her brand, her rules. And Amara didn't feel revenge. She felt peace. Because true power wasn't about destroying someone, it was about rising so high they have to look up just to find you again. Weeks turned into months, and Miriam quietly worked in the Mama Weave warehouse. At first, she hated every second of it, the long hours, the dusty boxes, the sound of laughter from women who once would have bowed to her. But as time passed, something in her began to shift. Every morning she'd see Amara walk through the workspace, greeting each employee by name, smiling, asking about their families. When a worker's child got sick, Amara paid for the hospital bill herself. When one of the mothers couldn't afford school fees, Amara covered it without hesitation. Miriam had never seen leadership like that. To her, power had always meant being feared, being above others. But Amara's power came from compassion, and somehow it made everyone stronger. One afternoon, after a long day of packing shipments, Miriam lingered near the office door. Amara was sitting at her desk, reviewing invoices, her face calm and focused. Miriam took a deep breath and knocked softly. Amara looked up and smiled. "Come in, Miriam." Miriam stepped forward, hands nervously clasped. "I just wanted to say something," she began quietly. "When I first came here, I thought you'd humiliate me, maybe make me pay for what I did. But you didn't. You gave me a chance. And now, I understand something I never did before. Amara leaned back in her chair, listening gently. You taught me, Miriam said, her voice trembling. That power isn't in money, it's in mercy. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt heavy with truth. Amara's eyes softened, and she stood up, walking around the desk until she was standing beside Miriam. She placed a hand on Miriam's shoulder and said softly, "And mercy is something you can only give once you've survived humiliation." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, realizing how true those words were. That night, as Amara locked up the office, she looked out over the factory floor. Rows of women working, laughing, creating a life from the same pain she once carried. And somewhere in that crowd was Miriam, no longer the proud, cruel woman she once was, but someone reborn through humility. Amara smiled to herself. The real victory wasn't winning the contract or building an empire. It was transforming pain into purpose, and watching even her enemies learn the beauty of grace. The lights glowed warmly across the grand hall as Amara walked onto the stage, her elegant gown flowing with every step. The audience rose in applause, women from every walk of life, cheering for the woman who had turned pain into power. In the front row sat her little boy, now a bright, smiling toddler, waving at her with both hands. His laughter echoed softly through the crowd, grounding her in the reason she had fought so hard to survive. Amara held the microphone, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "There was a time," she began, "when people laughed at me because I had nothing. They mocked my pain, my struggle, my silence." She paused, her eyes glistening as the crowd leaned closer. But every insult, every humiliation became a seed. And when the rain came, I bloomed. The audience erupted in applause. Some women stood, clapping with tears streaming down their faces. Others simply smiled, their hearts touched by her strength. As the camera panned over the crowd, it stopped for a moment on Miriam, sitting quietly in the back row. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her hands clapped the loudest. There was no bitterness now, only respect. She had seen the full circle of grace. Amara looked toward her son once more, whispering under her breath, "We made it, baby." The lights dimmed as soft music began to play. On the big screen behind her, white text appeared slowly against a black background. They tried to bury her, but they didn't know she was a seed. And the screen faded to black, leaving the audience in silent awe.